A Genesis reading and a gospel reading, both very much about temptation. Most people with some familiarity of the Bible know these two stories. You've got Eve and the serpent, and then Jesus and the devil in the desert. Have you considered the possibility that these two readings are even more similar than they first seem? Here is my assertion for the day. All three of Jesus' temptations were right there in Eve's apple. I still really wish it had a nice thunking sound as I put it on the ambo, but what can you do? As Lent is all about resisting temptation for the sake of holiness, this is a worthwhile thing to consider for the first Sunday of Lent. So let's review those temptations side by side, Genesis and the Gospel. Three temptations in the desert. The first one is food. Hey, Jesus, turn those rocks into loaves of bread. Apples are food. That one's pretty obvious. I don't feel the need to waste any more time on that one. The second temptation is pride. Hey, Jesus, prove your awesomeness by throwing yourself down this cliff without any harm. It's a dare more than anything else. It's a dare. And that's also in the Genesis reading when the serpent says to Eve, "Oh, no, don't worry. You surely won't die if you eat that fruit." It's the temptation of doing something risky and getting away with it. And that's always a bit prideful. And I think we all know that thrill, that temptation of thrill of doing something risky, whether it's jumping out of a plane or stealing a cookie from the cookie jar when you think your mom's not watching. I phrase that very specifically. When you think your mom's not watching, she's always watching the cookie jar. You never get away with it, never, not really. But it's all the same thing. And then finally, we've got temptation 3, glory and power and fame. Hey, Eve, eat that apple and you will be like God. Glory and power, right? Well, what does the devil finally offer Jesus in the desert? All the kingdoms in the world, if only Christ will bow down and worship him. Seems to me it's the same basic idea. Glory and power at the low, low cost of your immortal soul. And as my daily Mass people may recall, if you trade your soul for anything, even the literal entire world, you're getting a bad deal. It's a little like Eve with the serpent. She loses her place in paradise for the sake of a simple apple. And yes, I realize there's more to that, the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of garden of good and evil. But the point is, Eve didn't think about the cost because the serpent distracted her from that. So what if temptation is a pretty general thing in the end? What if most temptation boils down to those 3 general things? Bodily pleasure, like food, pride or inflated self-worth, or the promise of glory and status. The only temptation I could think of that's even a little bit different is the temptation of lashing out in anger. But even that isn't entirely different because sinful anger has a link with pride and inflated self-worth. So really, when you get down to it, maybe temptation is a pretty simple thing by nature. It's a worldly distraction from that which really matters. Either way, Eve lost to all 3 temptations at the same time, and Jesus resisted each one on its own. So what that means for all of us today is that, unfortunately, we're doomed to deal with this for the rest of our lives. Because metaphorically speaking, we're all Adam and we're all Eve. Practically speaking, if something happens to Adam and Eve, it's happening to all of us. So in that way, we're doomed. We are always going to have to deal with temptation. You're always going to have moments of hunger. You're always going to be tempted to act on your pride. You're always going to be tempted for that glory and power and status, which is so appealing. But at the same time, we also have the power to resist those temptations through Christ, because we share in his divine nature as he shares in our humanity. And the divine love of God is absolutely more powerful than any temptation, whether it be food, pride, or glory and status. So remember that. Remember that if you're ever offered anything for the price of your own soul, even if it's literally the entire world, it is ultimately a bad deal. Your soul is worth so much more than that. It's a little like trading your very identity for one underripe apple.